Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us in our dark corner of the world. Tonight, we have a terrifying compilation video for you, with some encounters that will chill you to the bone on this warm summer's evening. Now, sit back, relax, and remember, fear lies within. This incident happened to me a few years back, when I first moved out and rented my own apartment. I still find myself in disbelief that what I'm about to tell you actually happened to me. I have always been a fan of horror and listening to people's scary stories, but to find myself in a horrifying situation like I did gave me new respect for people who tell the scary things they've been through and encountered, and I wouldn't wish mine upon anyone. I had just turned 25, and I was starting a new job. I had been living at my parents' my whole life, and was now taking the first steps to start my own life by securing myself my first home. A rented apartment in my city, Buffalo, close to where I would be working, making for an easier commute. It was nothing special. A one-bedroomed apartment on the 3rd floor, but enough space for me and a great start to get myself out there. Just before I moved in, I met the landlord who I would be renting the apartment from. He was a quiet guy, around his mid-50s, short but stocky. On first impressions, he was a friendly guy. He welcomed me to the building and told me if I needed anything, that he was down the hall on the ground floor. A few nights after I'd settled into my new home, I woke to a sound coming from beyond my closet, on the other side of the wall from the apartment next to mine. Half asleep, I reached for my light, looking in the direction the sound was coming from. To describe it best, it was a distinctive tapping on the wall. It went on for a good minute or so. I got out of bed and walked over to the wall, trying to locate exactly where it was coming from, whilst thinking, why would someone be tapping on the wall at this hour? Well, to be honest, why would someone be tapping on the wall full stop? But as I reached the side of my closet, the area it seemed to be coming from, I placed my hand on the door as I leaned to listen, and it creaked too. As it did, and I listened, tapping suddenly stopped. I listened out for a good minute, trying to see if I could hear it again, but nothing. As I was about to head back to bed, it was then I instead heard the sound of mumbling, like someone was talking on the other side. The talking soon stopped, but the sound of pacing footsteps was very clear to hear. The walls were pretty much paper thin. The person on the other side was what it sounded like pacing up and down, right next to the wall. I made my way back to my bed. Still, the pacing continued for around 15 minutes. It was near 3 in the morning, and I couldn't sleep due to it. I had been in that apartment 3 days, and never seen anyone enter or leave that apartment, nor had I heard anything the previous nights before. The pacing eventually stopped. It was silent for a second, until I heard the door to that apartment slam shut. Finding it strange, I thought the next time I saw the landlord, I would ask him who was living next door, or see if I could find the neighbor myself. That following day, after I'd finished work, I happened to catch the landlord on my floor. He was heading out for a few hours. Whilst I had him, I took the opportunity to ask him about the apartment next to mine, and the person who lived in it. The landlord froze for a second, just staring at me, as if surprised by my question, before turning around and telling me that an older man lived there, by the name of Hector. He proceeded to tell me that Hector usually kept himself to himself, and was rarely seen in the day, as he was a bit of a night owl. I explained to him why I was asking, about the tapping on the wall and the late-night noises, but he casually brushed it off and told me it was nothing to be concerned about, and he would have a word with him about the late-night noise. He stated for me not to bother knocking on myself, as Hector was quite a socially awkward man. So if I ever did hear anything again, to just tell him. I had no intention of knocking on Hector's door anyway, as I wasn't really the confrontational type. The next few days, I didn't hear a sound from Hector's apartment next door, which was great. It was like speaking to the landlord had worked. I didn't wake up to any creepy knocking, and managed to have uninterrupted sleep. I was slowly settling into my new home. Then, one evening, after a long day at work, I needed to get back and just de-stress and relax. So I ran myself a hot bath and poured myself a glass of wine. I put the lights out and lit a few candles, winding down for the evening. As I lay there, I began to zone out with my thoughts. I had a flannel covering my eyes as I just lay there. Then, as I was in my own little world relaxing, my ears pricked up as I snapped out of my trance to a strange sound coming from my hallway. It sounded like a digital beeping. With the flannel half covering my eyes, I could have swore I saw a flicker of light, but assumed it was just the candles flickering. I stared into the dark hallway, as the bathroom door was ajar, but I could see nothing. I could hear nothing but silence. Putting it down to my mind playing tricks on me, I finished up in the bath and slowly edged my way to the door, reaching for the hallway light. As I clicked it on, just as I assumed the hallway was empty, relieved, I got ready for bed. Living alone, as some of you may know, can be quite creepy. After that bath, a bottle of wine, and a few long trying days at work, I was pretty beat. I lay down on my bed, drifting off pretty quick, looking forward to the much-needed lie-in I was going to get the next day. But just as I closed my eyes, the sound of my closet door creaking jolted me awake. There was no draft or breeze in the room to push it open, so naturally, I was a little freaked. I flicked on my light and stared over. After a good minute of watching the closet, I saw nothing. I don't know what I was expecting to see, but again my mind was playing tricks on me. I walked over to the closet and hesitantly opened it. Upon inspection, it was as it seemed, an empty closet. I hopped back into bed, and as soon as my head hit the pillow, it was pretty much lights out. It wasn't until hours later I woke up, still half sleeping, needing to pee. The wine had hit me. As I got up to go to the bathroom, I again noticed my wardrobe door open. I thought it strange, as I'd closed it before going to sleep. I headed over to it and pushed it too. It stayed shut, there was no issue with it opening on its own, and it wasn't faulty. But being so tired and just wanting to sleep, I brushed it aside, and headed to the bathroom before returning to bed. It was a hot night, so I slept with one leg out of the blankets and my feet out the sheets. I pretty much drifted back to sleep as my head hit the pillow. As the night passed, I must have been asleep for a few hours, when I again found myself waking up. This time, to a slight tickle sensation on my foot. You know, like the feeling of a tickle when something brushes your foot, or if you get a light sensation on your skin from knocking something. I assumed, with my feet out the sheets, that I had brushed my foot against the bed frame or something, so I rolled over and tucked my one leg up with the one leg still hanging out the sheets. What happened next, I will never forget. And it's the reason I will never sleep with my feet or legs hanging out the sheet in bed again. As I drifted back to sleep, I again felt something touch my foot. This time, it was an unmistakable feeling. I felt something wet brush and slide across the sole of my foot. Clearly not something brushing it off something. As I looked down at the bottom of my bed, I froze, crippled in fear, not able to breathe as if the oxygen was taken from me. I could see the dark-figured outline of a person's head at the bottom of my bed, with what could only have been their tongue that had brushed across and licked the sole of my foot. There was someone at the bottom of my bed, licking my foot. Terrified to my core, I screamed as I impulsively kicked my foot into the person's face as hard as I could, for them to fall to the floor, letting out a cry. I jumped out of bed, running out of my room to the front door as my fight or flight mode had kicked in. I chose the latter, as I broke into the hallway screaming for help. Looking back at my apartment, expecting someone right behind me, but no one followed. It was only seconds before an opposite neighbor opened his door, startled by the commotion, as he asked me what was wrong, tears rolling down my cheeks. I quickly explained someone was in my apartment and what happened. He looked shocked, as he told me to wait in his apartment as he called the police, and cautiously entered my apartment, searching for the intruder. The man shortly came out, telling me the police were en route, and that my apartment was empty. No one was there. The hallway was now occupied by onlookers, and at this point I was so shaken and scared, I couldn't stop crying. The police arrived quicker than expected, and when they did, they searched my apartment from head to toe. What they found shook me to the core. An officer came out of my apartment and told me to stand back as they knocked onto the apartment door next to mine, the apartment of Hector, the neighbor I'd never met. There was no answer. The police proceeded to break the door down and search that apartment too, as I questioned, why? With what seemed an age, they eventually exited with a man in cuffs. It was my landlord. His nose blooded. As I soon realized it was him, I had kicked him in the face. What the police found was through my built-in wardrobe. There was a compartment built in that led straight into the apartment next to mine. That apartment had been vacant the whole time. There was no Hector, and my sick, perverted landlord had been spying on me the whole time I'd been there, using that crawl space to enter my apartment. The police had found him hiding in the apartment, as he obviously couldn't come out without giving himself away, and had hoped the crawl space wouldn't be found. After further investigation, the police uncovered stashes of pictures of previous residents and myself in that apartment that this psycho had spied on over the years. I'm lucky I was a light sleeper that night, as I dread to think what could have happened. He must have thought I was asleep when he sickly did what he did. I moved out of that apartment straight away, and back in with my parents, pressing charges. It was the first place I had lived by myself, and thanks to that freak, I'll never feel safe living alone again. I can't say that experience hasn't affected me, but I've managed to move on past it, and get on with life. But it's still something that will always haunt me.
I'm a 26-year-old male who lives in the US, and I love the great outdoors. Camping is something I've done since I was in my early teens, so it's been a hobby of mine since I can remember. Along with a buddy of mine who shares the same interest as me, we love exploring new places, often going on hikes and camping trips together, and in the US we are not short of open wilderness to explore. But the last trip we took together is one that will always stick with me and scares the shit out of me. We had decided to take a long weekend camping trip to a forest in the east near West Virginia we had not explored before. As mentioned, exploring new places was something we enjoyed. So, after getting all of our gear together and starting off on our trip, we made our way to the forest we had done some research on. When we reached our location, we went off the beaten track and made our own way up, going deep into the forest. We often strayed from paths and made our own routes. As long as we knew our way back to the car or main roads, we didn't see a problem with that. It was also good to do this to us, as it's not uncommon to meet other hikers when exploring the main trails, so making our own route we found we really had more privacy and didn't bump into anyone, which added to the experience. The forest had trees taller than I'd seen before. They literally covered the sky above. When we had got deep enough inside, we found a great place to set up for the weekend. So, we unpacked, set up camp, and we took in the scenery around us. In our element, we decided whilst it was still early, we could do some more exploring and get to know the area and our new surroundings. As a keen photographer, I was in my element, taking pictures of the beauty of nature we found ourselves in. And after a good hour of hiking and enjoying the surrounding trails, we made our way back to our campsite as night began to fall, not wanting to be too far away from campsite when it was dark. But when the night finally came, the darkness consumed the area. We got our campfire roaring, bringing a warm glow to our campsite, and cooked some food whilst comparing the forest to previous camping trips we had taken. After a good couple of hours talking into the night and having a few beers, it was nearing midnight. Even after a day of hiking and exploring, we weren't tired yet, so we decided to have another drink as we kept our fire going, discussing what we would do the next day. As I got 2 more drinks, it was then I returned to my friend who, when I sat back down talking to him, was acting weird and had gone quiet all of a sudden, not wanting the conversation. I looked over at him and watched as he looked down, poking the remaining flames of the fire to keep it going. Again, I asked him a question, and he didn't answer. Not quite sure what was up with him, I asked if everything was okay. He looked up at me and said nothing, but more looked at me with concern in his eyes. He reached his hand out, gesturing for the bottle of beer. As I leaned over, passing it to him, he grabbed my hand, pulling me in closer. Thinking, what the fuck? It was then that he spoke to me in a quiet voice. He said, "Don't look now, but I think someone's watching us from behind the trees over in the front." What he told me shocked me. How was I not supposed to look now? I sat back in my chair, contemplating what he had just told me. Acting normal now, my friend thanked me for the beer. As we sat there, I sipped my beer, and without making it too obvious, I looked over in the direction he thought he had seen someone. As I quickly looked, I could indeed see the outline of a figure in the tree lining. My heart beginning to race, now thinking, who the fuck was watching us in the middle of a forest, gone midnight? Who the hell was out here? I looked back at my friend, acknowledging that I had seen what he was talking about. He whispered to me that we needed to confront whoever it was and that if need be, we had our hunting knives as we always did. I agreed, as someone watching us in the middle of the forest at night, in literally the middle of nowhere, who we didn't know, was fucking weird and downright creepy. It was then, as I stood up to go to my tent, we looked in the direction, and the person had gone. I looked back at my friend, and he couldn't see them either. It was then we heard it. The rustling and running footsteps in between the tree lining circling our campsite. My friend stood up as he told me to get the knife and flashlight. I didn't hesitate as he shouted, asking who was out there, and that we had seen them. I returned with my knife and my flashlight, passing the light to my friend, the fire slowly dying with less light to the area. As we shone the light around the tree lining, we again could hear the footsteps moving between the trees in the distance, but to our fear, there was more than one set of footsteps running out there. There was clearly more than one person out there watching us. My friend, shining the flashlight in all directions, slightly seeing the dark figure in the distance, my heart racing, not knowing what this was and what these people were doing. Backing up to our tents, my friend shouted for them to show themselves and what it was they wanted. I grabbed my camera from the tent, thinking I could use the flash to try and get pictures of who was out there. As I clenched my knife and held out my camera, it was then we heard the sounds of male chants and screams coming from the distance in the tree lining. I quickly flashed my camera, taking a burst of photos of the area, and as I looked down at the images, the color drained from my skin. There were multiple figures in the near distance, the flash lighting up multiple sets of eyes. I could count offhand maybe 10 people. Showing my friend, I saw the fear in his face. Then, as the chanting stopped and silence fell, we could only hear the sound of wind traveling through the trees, until a figure came forward, just enough that we could see their outline in the distance, shouting,
"Leave now, whilst you have the chance."
Hearts racing and seeing the outline of more figures slowly join him sent our adrenaline through the roof. We wasted no time in accepting our warning, grabbing our bags and leaving our tents behind and getting ourselves out of there and in the opposite direction and the way we had come. All the while, looking back to see if anyone was following us. It took us an age to get back to the car at night, but there was no chance we were staying around after that. When we got back to our car, we just wanted to get to the nearest town and away from there. We stayed in a motel for a day and tried to understand what had happened and who was out there. From talking to locals, we believe we had found ourselves camping in the forest, near where people lived in the forest, as we were told it was not uncommon for groups of people to live out in the forests. Forest people, tribes, whatever you want to call them. But whoever they were, we were definitely not wanted, and we were not welcome in that area. We were lucky we got out of there when we did, and when told to do so, as who knows what would have happened. The image that I caught on my camera still sends shivers down my spine today. The multiple sets of eyes glowing from the camera light will always stay with me. This trip has not stopped us camping, but we tend to stick to the designated trails now. We don't want to ever experience something like that again.
This happened to me in the back end of 2022. I'm from the Midlands, UK. I live alone in a usually quiet and non-eventful area, where some may say is boring. I work a lot of late shifts, so my friend often crashes at my place from time to time. having a spare key and letting himself in to chill and help out with the place. One evening, after I'd finished work, I returned home and was looking forward to zoning out and relaxing after what had already been a busy week. Tired and ready for the weekend, it still seemed like the week was dragging, so with no plans of my friend coming around that evening, I decided I'd make some food, prep for work, and have an early night. Having finished all my tasks and having made some quick food, which consisted of a ready meal nuked in the microwave, not the best I know, but the quickest option, as I didn't have the motivation to cook fresh that night, I relaxed and watched some Netflix whilst letting my food go down. Before I knew it, it was nearing midnight. I couldn't believe where the time had gone, as always, so I took myself off to bed, knowing I had an early start the next day. Clockwork, as they say. That night I was settled, but something woke me. As I broke from my peaceful slumber, I could hear the sound of talking downstairs. As I sat up, I listened out, as I broke from the groggy-like state I found myself in, just waking up. I could have swore I heard a laugh from outside my room, and that's what woke me. Had I been dreaming and woke myself up? Dreaming the laugh, or had I actually heard something? As I moved around, sitting up on the edge of my bed, I looked at the time. With it being 2:30 a.m., I couldn't hear anything now. So assuming I had been dreaming, I took a sip of water before looking to get back to sleep. That was until I heard the undeniable sound of my TV from downstairs, blaring static. I froze mid-sip, the glass of water in my hand. What the fuck? I was pretty sure I'd turned off the TV before coming to bed. Standing up, I moved towards my bedroom door as I slowly opened it. I could see the glowing light from the TV downstairs. Had I left it on? Exiting my bedroom, I went to head downstairs, but froze in my tracks as a ball of fear built in the pit of my stomach. From questioning myself while leaving the TV on, it was then the real situation hit me like a ton of bricks. The TV went from static to channel as it changed. Someone was in my house. I felt myself getting hot as my heart began to race as I stood at the top of my stairs. When the thought popped into my head, my friend often stayed over and actually had a spare key. Thinking surely that was the case and he had just let himself in, probably from a drunken night out, I slowly descended the stairs as I called out his name. As I reached the bottom and turned the corner looking into the room, the colour drained from my skin. Sitting on the sofa was not my friend, but the sight of a gaunt-looking lady with matted hair, as she slowly turned, looking and smiling at me with wide eyes. Frozen to the spot, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. This woman looked like a crack addict. As she just sat there smiling at me, I finally managed to break out of my shock-like state as I screamed, "What the hell are you doing in my house? Who are you?" My demanding questions fell on deaf ears, as the smile vanished from the woman's face, as she let out a blood-curdling scream as she picked up a glass off my table, throwing it at me. I just about managed to avoid being hit square in the face with it as it smashed on the wall behind me. Looking back in anger, the woman's eyes raged as she again screamed, running towards me. My heart racing, not knowing who this crazed woman was, I ran back up the stairs, slamming my door shut as I locked it, and grabbed my phone, calling the police. As they answered and I told them the situation, someone had broken into my house. It was then there was knocking at my bedroom door. "The police are on the way," I shouted. The knocking continued, followed by a hauntingly calm voice as they said, "Come out. It's okay. We can talk." "What are you doing in my house?" What the fuck, I thought. Your house? She was clearly crazy. I told the operator on the line what was happening and to hurry. As the police were en route, the knocking continued, and the terrifying giggle of the woman sounded from the other side of the door as she repeated the same words. "Come out. We can talk. What are you doing in my house?" That was what felt like the longest wait for the police ever. As they arrived, the woman never left. They arrived to find her stood on the other side of my door, still knocking, with her ear pressed up against the door. As the police arrested her, she just smiled at them, asking who I was.
When I was finally able to open and exit my room to talk to the officers, the woman was being escorted away. Not before our eyes met one last time, as she stared at me with that crazed, psychotic look. It was later found out that the woman was a patient at a nearby psychiatric facility that had somehow wandered and escaped from the grounds. And it was not just a coincidence that it was my house she wandered into, as I found out that the house I lived in was her last home before whatever happened in her life caused her to be in a psych ward. How she entered was through the back window in the downstairs bathroom, as it was left open by me. That night will always stick with me as one of the craziest and scariest moments of my life. A surreal situation to find myself in, but now I'm sure to always check all my doors and windows and make sure they're locked at night.
This happened to me on a weekend getaway I had taken last year back in 2023. What happened I still think about and angers me to this day. I feel lucky that I'm able to tell you this story, as it could have ended so much differently. I was out hiking as I do every year for a long weekend getaway. Usually I go with friends, but occasionally I'll venture out alone. This was one of those times I'd indeed ventured out by myself. It was somewhere I had hiked and camped before, local to where I lived. My first day was spent exploring and relaxing. Having built up an appetite from a long afternoon, I had set up my campsite and began to prepare something to eat. I didn't settle for a packed lunch and took fresh ingredients as I loved cooking out in the open. So, as I sat making my food, I could hear the sound of footsteps approaching in the distance. Looking up, it was then I could see a man approaching me. Now, it wasn't uncommon to see other hikers or campers, obviously, but with him approaching me from behind, heading over to me, I was, of course, cautious. As the man neared, I could see a smile on his face as he waved over. "Hi there, sorry to intrude. I'm just making my way through looking for a good campsite. My name's John, nice to meet you," he had said as he reached his hand out to shake mine. Standing up, I accepted the handshake as we exchanged a few words. John then proceeded to tell me how he was beat and needed to stop for a rest to recharge the batteries for 5, and wanted to know if I would be so kind as to let him share a seat at my campsite for a moment, whilst he gathered his energy. With him seeming like a nice enough guy, I accepted, and let him have a seat as I offered him a beer, to his delight. As we sat sharing a beer, we talked normal chit-chat about the outdoors, camping, and if he'd ever been here before. The conversation was going well, until I started to get a strange vibe from John. After the conversation of camping died down, there was a period of awkward silence, where John would just stare at me and smile. With the conversation having dried up, I looked to start up another conversation as I sipped my beer, asking John where he was from. It was then I felt a sense of unease build inside of me. As I asked the question, the smile dropped from John's face, as he just stared at me with a hardened, frowned look in his eyes. With no exaggeration, this lasted from a good 30 seconds, which at the time felt like forever, until I uncomfortably asked if he was okay. He continued to stare until he sternly said, "Do you always ask such personal questions?" Personal questions? I thought I only asked where he was from. Feeling the tension, I apologized, saying I didn't mean any offense if I'd caused it. As again, John just stared back at me, feeling uncomfortable and ready to wrap this awkward encounter up. It was then the angered look vanished from John's face as a smile again broke out as he howled laughing, saying he was just messing and winding me up. I remember not being too pleased with the joke as I half-heartedly chuckled back. John proceeded to tell me he was from all over and he was just travelling and passing through. He went wherever he needed to be, whatever that meant. The conversation again died out as John again stared at me. I continued to work my fire, thinking what the fuck was this guy's deal? Not wanting to have his company any longer, I stated I needed to go get some more firewood, hoping that would speed up the process. And sure enough, it worked. Finally, he chugged the rest of his beer as he stood up, thanking me for the drink, and that he must get going now. Like music to my ears, I was more than happy to see him leave. What a weird encounter, I thought, as I watched him walk off into the distance after saying our goodbyes. Later that night, as I finished up my dinner and turned in for the night, I couldn't help but have a sweep of the area after my strange encounter earlier that afternoon. Just to make sure. You know how your mind gets carried away sometimes. With nothing but the wilderness around me, I was finally content and made my way into my tent. I must have begun to drift off pretty quick as something woke me. I looked at my watch and it was 1:26, just over half an hour since I had turned in for the night. Curious to what woke me, I listened to my surroundings as outside the tent, I could have swore I had heard the sound of shuffling. Was something out there? An animal? Or worse, as my mind was thinking, was someone out there? I unzipped the tent and stepped out with my hunting knife. Looking around, I couldn't see anything. There was no sign of an animal or anyone. Looking for tracks or prints, I couldn't see anything out of the ordinary. As I conceded I was dreaming and thought I had heard the noises, I headed back into my tent, lying my head back down and trying to rest for the next day. Slowly drifting off again, it wasn't long before I again shot up, but this time a surge of terror and fear coursing through me, the smell of smoke filling my nose, as I looked forward and could see the front of my tent was on fire as the flames began to spread and engulf the shelter I laid in. My heart racing, my hand searching rapidly for my knife as I clasped it in my hand, turning, plunging it through the back of the tent, ripping it open as fast as I could, as I threw myself out, coughing as I inhaled the smoke and fumes of melting polyester. All these thoughts spiraling in my mind. What the fuck had happened? Standing and running to grab the pot of water I had left out, it was then I saw it had been tipped over. Looking around, it was then I saw the outline of someone running away, back into the shadows of the forest. Someone had done this. This was done on purpose, and then it hit. I knew it was John from earlier that day. My tent and belongings engulfed in flames as I battled to put it out. I couldn't believe it. That psycho had tried to burn me alive as I slept. The fear I had inside me was replaced by anger. That despicable and soulless act was, I'm sure, meant to have killed me. That night, I searched for the man, but had no luck finding him as he was long gone. He could have been anywhere, and all I knew was that his name was supposedly John. I reported the crime to the police, and filed a report giving as much detail as I could about him. Nothing ever came of it, and no suspect was ever brought forward. After that experience, I never fall into the trap of being so hospitable to strangers I come across whilst camping now. You can never be sure of who you welcome into your campsite, and what their true intentions are. I work in sales for a reputable health and wellness centre, and with it being a popular site, and my role as a sales consultant, as you can imagine, I meet a lot of different people who come and tour to see if they want to join and sign up. I enjoy my job, meeting new people and the fast-paced environment it is. But having said all that, this experience that happened to me is something that has taken me a while to get over, and really made me cautious of who I'm talking to. I was leaving work one evening when I heard my name being shouted. I looked over to see a guy waving over to me as he made his way over. I didn't really recognize him, but as he approached and asked how I was and knew my name, it was like we had spoken before, and like he knew me. Now, with my role, in all honesty, I meet and speak to a lot of people every day, even sign people up over the phone without seeing them in person. So I didn't know if I knew this guy or signed him up. Not wanting to be rude, I smiled and said I was okay, asking how he was. He said he was okay and just about to go for a workout when he saw me. Then said he thought he would just say hi and let me know how beautiful I was looking today. Not expecting that and thinking, okay, a little weird, as I really couldn't place his face. I said thank you and for him to enjoy his time in club. We said goodbye and I left. Looking back, I could see him watching me as I walked out the building. Strange, but thinking nothing more of it, I left for the night. The next day, when I was on my shift, I was talking to one of my colleagues when she said a member was in earlier that day, asking for me. I asked who, and she proceeded to tell me his name, Joshua. I couldn't recall who that was, and she got him up on the system to show me. It was the same guy from the night before. Looking at his account, it wasn't even me who had signed him up. How did he know who I was, and why did he act like we knew each other? My colleague brought up a good point, that maybe he had overheard my name from other staff saying it. Again, brushing it off, thinking maybe that was the case. Later that night, as I was at home, my phone pinged. Picking it up, I saw I had a friend request on Facebook from that same guy, Joshua, from where I worked. Ignoring the friend request, I put my phone back down. But a minute or so later, my phone began vibrating again. Picking it back up, I had a new follower on Instagram. As my Instagram profile wasn't private, it was again the same guy. And within seconds, I began to get like after like on all my photos. Soon followed by a message that said something like, "Hey, looking good in your pictures. I sent you a friend request on Facebook. Accept when you get a chance." Thinking this guy was a bit forthcoming, I replied saying thank you, and that I didn't really use Facebook that much. He replied straight away, saying he guessed they'd have to talk to me on here then. Not really wanting to get to know him, I didn't want to give off any of the wrong signals, so I politely let him know I wasn't looking to get to know anyone. It was then he replied laughing, saying that was a lonely way of thinking. I stopped replying and left it at that. Over the next week, I had no more messages. Every time I posted a picture or story, within minutes he would like them. I hadn't seen him whilst at work for a while, which was good. But again one evening when leaving, as I walked out the building, I noticed him standing out front. As soon as he saw me, he made his way over, smiling. He proceeded to say he'd seen my story from the weekend and knew the bar I was at. I smiled and continued to walk to my car. It was then he said we should go together one night and asked for my number. Feeling uneasy now, after I'd already told him I wasn't looking for anything, I told him I wouldn't give him my number. He stopped in his tracks, staring at me, making me feel so uncomfortable. I told him I wasn't looking for a date and sorry that he wasn't my type, trying to justify myself. But he continued to stare at me for what felt like forever, before breaking out into a smile, laughing and telling me that it was okay, and that he would see me around. Finally, thinking he'd got the message as he walked off, I jumped in my car and got out of there. Later that night is when things became creepy. I have a Vinted account where I was selling a load of old clothes. I had notifications that someone had tried to buy all my listed items. Looking into my account, I saw it was the same person trying to buy the items. I then received a message from the buyer, asking if they could get all my items and a favor. A favor, I thought. Strange. And as I looked closer at the seller's account, a ball of anxiety built in the pit of my stomach. The name on the account included the name Josh. I messaged back asking bluntly, was this who I thought it was? And the reply made me feel creeped out. It read, "Lol, yeah, it's me. I'm trying to buy your number. How about it?" I felt nauseous. How the hell did he even know my Vinted account, or that I even had one? That was strange. I replied telling him how I found what he was doing weird and didn't appreciate it, and that I'd already told him no. His reply made me feel sick. He said, "Okay, gorgeous, keep playing hard to get." Hard to get? I scoffed. Was this guy actually deluded? I blocked him from my Vinted and logged out, and did the same on Instagram, blocking him from seeing me. It had gotten to the point that every time I arrived at work, I felt on edge, feeling I was going to see him. I should have told my colleagues about it, but I didn't. I stupidly kept it to myself, and that's what nearly cost me. I was speaking to the same colleague one evening when they mentioned that Joshua had been in, asking what my shifts were and when I'd be in next. Angry at the sheer audacity of the guy, thinking it was acceptable to pretty much stalk me. It had got to the point I needed to do something about it. Thinking when my manager was in the next day I would tell him about it. That night, as I got myself ready for bed, I was locking up when I noticed out the window a car parked over the road from my house. Looking closer, I could see it was a Navy Ford. I couldn't see anyone in it. It looked empty. Thinking my neighbors could have a visitor, I closed my curtains and went to bed. The next day at work, I went ahead with what I had decided to do and told my manager about Joshua, explaining I didn't feel comfortable with him around. My manager, surprised at what I told him, said they would keep an eye on him and monitor the situation, but that's all they could do for now. Shocked and kind of annoyed with that, I voiced my opinion, letting them know I thought there was enough reason for banning him. but they stuck with the "we will monitor the situation" approach, as we can't accuse. Leaving work disappointed with that. It was then I saw Joshua, and as I noticed it, I felt physically sick. Fear struck me. He was getting out of a car, and the car that he got out of was a Navy Ford. The same car that was parked outside my house the night before. Shocked, not knowing what to do, I looked away, trying to avoid eye contact as I headed to my car. I jumped in, driving home, thinking to call the police and report it, which is exactly what I did when I got back. I told the police how I was being stalked and that I knew my stalker had been outside my house the night before and had been watching all my social media accounts. They took all my details and asked if I physically saw him outside my house. I told them I saw his car parked outside. They said they would keep it locked and to call them back if anything else happened. As without any real evidence he was there outside my house, they couldn't accuse him of any wrongdoing. I couldn't believe it. It was like nobody was listening to me. Sitting at home that night alone was horrible. I felt on edge, all my thoughts racing, thinking about the same thing. Was it actually him? Was it his car I saw, or just a coincidence? As I slowly started to drift off, tiredness beating me, I stood ready to take myself off to bed as I did one final check of the doors and windows. I felt satisfied to go to bed. After lying in bed for what seemed like 5 minutes, I had to go to the bathroom. On my way back, I had that feeling of paranoia, feeling I needed to look out the window to check one more time. But as I pulled back the curtain, my tiredness was replaced by a bolt of fear. The Navy Ford, it was outside my house. My heart began to race. It was him. There was no doubt in my mind. Panic washing over me, I rushed to get to my phone and call the police. As I dialed, it was then I heard it. The creak of floorboards from downstairs. He was in my house. Locking my bedroom door, the police finally answered. I told them what was happening and that my stalker was in my house. They told me they were sending officers right away. As much as I needed to hear that, the fear coursed through me as my door handle began to rattle. I screamed that the police were on their way and that I knew it was Joshua. As I shouted that, the door handle stopped rattling, and the sound of footsteps retreated down the stairs. I looked out the window to see a hooded figure running back to the Navy Fort and speeding off into the night. The police arrived shortly after. A nervous wreck, I told them everything and that Joshua had been stalking me, and that he had taken it to the next level and broken into my house. The police ended up paying him a visit and questioning him. He completely denied stalking me and breaking into my house, claiming he had spoken to me on social media and had originally tried to go on a date with me, but I turned weird and he lost interest. He claimed he had never stalked me. Sure, liked a few photos on my social media, but that wasn't a crime. And although he did have a Navy Ford, so many people did, they couldn't prove it was his. I couldn't believe the lies he had told them. The next few days I felt sick. I lost my appetite, feeling this would never end, and he would once again be stalking me and invading my life. But finally the breakthrough I needed came, and the evidence needed to arrest Joshua. After investigating, the police had managed to see CCTV from my workplace, of him hanging around, seemingly waiting for me. But the key was his car. They could see his Navy Ford and the license plate matching that to the camera footage from my neighbor's house. You could see it was the same car, and you could see him patrolling my house at night, looking for ways to enter. The thought of it was horrifying, but thankfully it was enough to prosecute. Joshua was finally apprehended and charged with breaking and entering, harassment with potential to cause harm. He was sentenced to jail time, and also hit with a restraining order banning him from coming into contact with me. I am so thankful my neighbor had cameras outside their property, that it was in view of mine, as matching that with the footage from work really was the key. That whole experience is something I will never forget, and I just wish I'd been taken more seriously by management at the time. I urge others going through the same to speak up, as these types of crimes happen far too often, and sadly, some people are not as lucky as I was. Back in 2017, the way I looked at the world changed forever. This was due to an experience myself and my wife had and encountered whilst out on a hiking trip. We're from the UK. and over in our part of the globe, we're not short of wonderful and stunning pockets of woodlands to explore. We like to mix it up each year, having a summer getaway abroad, but also having a more local getaway, exploring different areas of the UK. So whilst on one of our annual hiking trips, we had travelled the long distance up north to Northumberland, having our getaway planned for 5 nights. It was on our second day when we were heading on our hiking trip. The vast scenery of nature that lies in that part of the country is nothing more than majestic. It is an amazing sight to see, and for people who love nature, it surely is mesmerizing. Halfway through our exploration, and as we filtered through the champers of forest that surrounded us, we were deep within nature, the everyday world feeling so far away. It's easy to see how people can become lost inside the endless forest we found ourselves in. We had been exploring for a good few hours by then, and had travelled pretty deep while straying from the usual paths hikers would take, as we wanted to create our own route, explore maybe some uncharted territory that others hadn't. As we talked between each other, it was then in the distance we heard something. The sound had travelled from not too far ahead of us, as it broke through the silence of the forest that we were in. It sounded like a woman. We stopped in our tracks as we listened, and there it was again, the sound of a woman calling from up ahead. We couldn't really make out what was being said, but curious to know what the calls were, or what was going on, we headed in the direction of the calls. Breaking through a clearing in the distance as I scanned the area, it was then my eyes fell upon something sticking out of the ground. It was a well. Looking around, we couldn't see anybody. Only this well, in the middle of a forest? We were sure the sound had come from this way. The intrigue of the well was soon replaced by confusion, as the sound of a woman again broke out. It was coming from right in front of us. As we approached the well, it was undoubtedly the sound of someone calling out. What was being said, we still couldn't quite hear. As I approached the well, then I heard it again. This time as clear as day. "Help me!" It was a woman's voice calling out for help, and it was coming from inside the well. Not quite believing what I was hearing, I gripped the edge of the well as I leant over, peering down. I called out, "Hello!" But there was no reply. Turning to see the concerned look on my wife's face, I ushered her over, asking for the flashlight. As she reached in her bag to get it, we heard it again. "Help me!" echoed up from the bottom of the well. Grabbing the flashlight, I aimed it down the well, looking to see who was down there. As I called out, "Hello! Don't worry, help is here, are you okay?" There was no reply. And as I tried my hardest to see who was down there, I couldn't see anything. Not even the outline of a person. But the unmistakable call for help again echoed up the well. With a surge of adrenaline, I told the person to hang tight as I pulled out the climbing rope from my bag, tying it to the sturdy frame of a nearby tree. My wife calling down the well as she tried to see. I threw the rope down, and making sure I had enough left to reach the bottom, which it did, I called down, telling the person to grab a hold of the rope and hoist themselves up. If they couldn't, then to tie the rope around themselves and we would pull them up. But again, there was no reply. Calling out, I waited for a response, but nothing. I began to pull the rope, but no one had grabbed a hold of it. I looked at my wife, confused, and concerned someone was too injured to move down there. And there it was again, the call for help. There was only one thing left I could think to do, and that was to lower myself down the well. My wife, on the other hand, didn't want me to, as she was slightly concerned by the whole ordeal, and the lack of response by whoever it was down there. She thought it best to get help and call for help. But if someone was in need of help, we had to provide that help, who knows how injured they were. As my wife conceded I was right, I readied myself, and began my descent into the well, flashlight readied as I dropped deeper and deeper, before finally reaching the bottom. My feet touched the soggy soil beneath me as I peered around the well. But there was no one. As my light travelled around, it was then I could see at the bottom there was a narrow pathway. I shined my light in, calling out, "Hello, where are you?" Before my voice box cut out, with shock consuming me, as my flashlight lay upon something I never expected. To my horror, what lay in front of me was a decomposed, dead body. Literally nearly the bare bones of a human body. I had no words as I heard my wife call to me, asking if everything was okay. I didn't know what to say. I couldn't even think straight. And as I stood there, frozen in shock, it was then my heart nearly burst through my chest as the blood-curdling scream of my wife echoed from above me. Instantly breaking me from my trance, I looked up shouting, "What is it? Was she okay?" She screamed someone was behind her. I can tell you now, I've never climbed as fast as I did that day. When I reached the top and was out, I saw the look and pale complexion of my shaking, scared wife. Grabbing her and asking her who was here and where they were. What she told me next sent chills down my spine, and I'll never forget. Crying, she said when I was down the well, she felt someone behind her as someone whispered the same words in her ear we had heard in the well. "Help me." Surprised, she had turned, but there was no one behind her. Until she turned back round and saw it. The figure of a woman standing on the other side of the well in the distance. That's when she had screamed. Looking back, the woman had gone. After hearing what she told me, I couldn't understand or make sense of it. Not telling her at that moment what I had discovered, I told her we needed to leave. Once we were away from the well and out of that area, I told her what I had found. The horror in her eyes said it all. That day, I don't know what happened, but I do know we encountered something paranormal. Whoever it was down that well, I fully believe their spirit still lingered in those woods. We contacted the authorities to tell them of our discovery. After that day, myself and my wife looked differently at a lot of things, and what we believed in. Seeing is believing, and that haunting experience will stick with me forever. Thanks again for joining us, guys. We hope you enjoyed this compilation video of some of the stories that chilled us when we first heard them. If you have any topics that you want us to cover, let us know in the comments. And of course, if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and join the Horror Motives community, so we can bring you some more chilling stories and horror content. Until next time, guys, fear lies within.